views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of WTJX, its board, staff, or underwriters.
Good day. You're listening to Ability Radio. I'm one of your hosts, Kishma B. Francis of the Disability Rights Center of the Virgin Islands. And we are joined today by two guests, actually one guest and one co-host. My co-host today is Jasmine Balmer. Jasmine, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us about your work with students.
Sure. Like Kishma said, my name is Jasmine Balmer. I'm a two-time HBCU graduate from Norfolk State University and North Carolina Central University School of Law. I have a background both in education and legal advocacy. Before going into law, I spent several years working with students both here or on the mainland and in China. So supporting students and their families has always been at the center of what I do.
And our guest today is Rebecca Russell. Rebecca is no stranger to the Disability Rights Center of the Virgin Islands. Rebecca, if you could just tell our listening audience a little about yourself and your role as an advocate.
Okay, hey, good day, everyone. I'm Rebecca Russell. As a parent advocate, I've been ensuring that students' educational needs are understood and, of course, respected and appropriately addressed within the special education process. I do my best to work and support the families and help them navigate through the IEP process. And if I had a wish, I would ensure that every student receives a free, appropriate public education that is truly individualized, meaningful, and aligned with their potential, and help them become the best version of themselves.
And Rebecca Russell was one of our advocates for about 1.5 years, Rebecca. Is that correct?
This is correct.
Okay. Yeah, she was one of our advocates. And not only did she assist with our presentations, or virtual presentations, she also assisted with providing one-on-one support to parents. So our topic today is special education serve as a service, but we want to take a deep dive and we just want to explain the difference between an IEP diploma and a general high school diploma. But before we do, let's just talk about special education. So special education is a service. And in order for the students to be eligible for this service, they have to be evaluated and it has to significantly adversely affect their educational performance. So this is all the definition that I'm talking about. It's located in IDEA. IDEA came from the Education for Handicap Act, and then it came from Every Student Succeeds Act, and it just kept developing over the years. So by 2001, we actually had more of a robust federal law, which catered towards students with disabilities that would qualify for special education services. So under this act, they're not only telling you about who's eligible, and IDEA specifically spells out 13 categories in which a student can be eligible, but also when they're eligible. So not every student with a disability qualifies for special education. Now, special education is just a service. Let me just say that it's just a service, okay? And this service is for students where the educational performance is significantly or adversely affected. And this is in order for them to gain access to the same free, appropriate public education as their peers. So when we look at special education as a service, we're not saying it's a class. Now, there are classes that will be self-contained for students that may need more services. However, there are a lot of students that just probably might need speech, probably might need a behavioral intervention plan, probably might need just, what is that other one called? I just lost my train of thought. What is that other one called, Rebecca? Where they just
Accommodations.
need, there you go. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. I know you got it. So, when we talk about special education, we're looking at the service, and the federal government sends specific dollars, per pupil dollars, to assist these students with gaining the same access to education, free, appropriate public education as their peers. So, Rebecca, from your standpoint, how does a student with a disability benefit from special education services?
It removes the barriers for the student, and it builds, or at least it should build, a pathway for that student's independence, build skills and confidence, and it should be designed to adapt to the student how he or she learns.
And that's important that the listening audience understand, to adapt to the student how he or she learns. One thing, when a student becomes eligible for special education, they have an IEP. And what happened in 2001 IDEA, it gave the parents and the student a seat at the table. Originally, it was optional if they, were even invited. But 2001 stated, parent, student, you have a seat at the table. So this IEP team meets and they evaluate the student's performance, evaluate the services that are needed, and they create a plan. Rebecca, if you could just talk about that plan.
Okay, first of all, the IEP is the Individualized Education Program. It's legally defined as a written plan that describes the special education and related services that an eligible student with a disability will receive in public school.
Yes.
This plan has accommodations, supports needed for this student. It identifies goals as well, which the students should be able to master with the supports provided.
Yes, and those goals are very important because the goals are measured for a specific length and is based on not only the services that are being provided. And when we talk about the services that are being provided, we're talking about the frequency of the services being provided and ultimately the outcome when that service is correctly provided. So, Rebecca mentioned accommodations. Now, I want to be sure to let the listening audience know, since not every student that has a disability may be eligible for special education services, they may be eligible for accommodations under the 1973 Rehabilitation Act, Section 504. Now, Section 504 is where the word access comes in. So when we talk about access, we're talking about the ability for the child not only to receive the same education as their peers, however, given accommodations such as extended time, such as, time to sit close or preferential seating, given those accommodations, they will be able to learn alongside their peers. So, Jasmine, you have been a teacher and you have seen this play out in the classroom. How does special education benefit students?
So you're absolutely right on both of those things. I've been a teacher. I've had students who have required accommodations, and I will say educationally it has been very life-changing for them. You go from a student who, and I'm just trying to think of an example that I witnessed in the classroom or experienced, but you may have a student who, to your point, may have sat in the back of the classroom, wasn't as engaged, but the closer, or their accommodation requires them to be closer to the board, and the closer they get to the board or the closer they sit to the teacher, they are no longer distracted because they're not getting distracted by the multiple different heads or the different things that are going on in front of them, and they're able to just focus. And that's just one example of how accommodations can benefit students. And it's not only elementary, middle, high school age students. Accommodations go up to college, law school, any facet of education.
Yes, you're definitely right. And I'm glad you mentioned that, Jasmine, because when we talk about accommodations, we're talking about something that is able to travel with the student even out of school. So special education services, they start at age 3 and they end when the student departs high school. Accommodations pick up, and accommodations, you can have them in the workplace also. Okay? So when we talk about students with disabilities, I just want to hone in and state that a student with a disability may qualify for IEP diploma or may qualify for a high school general education diploma. So there's a difference between both of them. And I know Rebecca Russell, she's worked hard and defining and really researching it. So I'm going to let her take the lead on this segment of the conversation. Rebecca, just define the high school general education diploma versus the IEP diploma.
Okay. So an IEP diploma is awarded to a student with an individualized education program. They have to complete their individualized goals outlined in the IEP, but not fully meet the regular standard requirements for the high school diploma. And this falls under the framework for Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And there's certain factors that needs to be considered. The requirements are based on, again, the student's IEP goals, not the standard graduation criteria. It includes modified coursework and alternate expectations, which sometimes may not be equivalent to the standard diploma, which is required for college entry, military enlistments, and things of that nature. Alternate diploma, it follows an alternate curriculum aligned for the standards of that child and how that child should be taught or learns. Other factors to consider for that, it's often tied to alternate test assessments that are not the same for the testing for the standardized diploma that a mainstream student will take. And this varies from jurisdiction, state to state. The design for the students is geared to, again, teaching them how they learn. A standardized diploma has its own criteria to it. I'm not versed on exactly how much credits the high school there requires, but it's totally different based with regards to the IEP diploma or the alternate diploma. IEP diploma basically says the child met his or her goals, and that has nothing to do with criteria for standardized diplomas.
So that's a big difference because the IEP diploma is based on goals. The high school diploma, general education diploma, is based on the set of criteria that is set forth by the Department of Education, which is the credits, the civic, hours, etc., and the grades. So Rebecca touched on as far as the goals itself. Just reiterate, Rebecca, who qualifies for an IEP diploma?
Okay, IEP diploma, a student who is eligible under the Individualized Disabilities Education Act. They have a documented disability that affects the school performance, and they work on goals instead of full academic standards, which does not meet the state requirements for a standardized diploma.
Yes. And it's let's just state that even though a student may have an individualized educational plan, they might they may be in general education and receiving general education and special education services and still qualify for the high school general education diploma because they are meeting the criteria. So even though their disability is significantly affecting their educational performance, they're still within the general education setting and they're getting the general education diploma. So I've had several conversations with parents about when they should have this conversation about general education, general high school diploma versus IEP diploma. Rebecca, based on your experience, when should a parent have this conversation with the student's IEP team?
At the junior high school level, because now at that point, the child would have been in a modified curriculum already. So they were already considered for alternate assessments and teaching, and they may be significantly below grade level, not sure. But those conversations should begin then, because now high school is the next step. It would now open the doors for high school courses questioning, the state assessments requirements, and the credits that will begin the pathway for that student.
So what you're talking about, Rebecca, it sounds like transition services, like they're transitioning at that
Yes.
time.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay. That's so when the parent have this conversation with the IEP team, because if you could just give them a background about yourself, about going through the transition conversation, how should this conversation look? Because there's a lot of parents out there that don't know they can have a conversation about general education versus IEP diploma. How should this conversation look?
So at that junior high school level, questions should be asked. Is my child gearing towards alternate diploma or standardized diploma? The IEP team, including the parent, would have to sit down and assess that. And once that's determined, it would now give a pathway to the questions that are needed for the pathway that was determined that would be the best fit for that student. And once that pathway is chosen and the child now was in high school, now we have to look at what are the requirements for the pathway the family or the IEP team chose for that student. Curriculum, standard assessments, testing, all of these questions need to be placed on the table. We need to know if the child would like to go to college. Is the child going to military, workforce, day center? All of these questions need to be placed on the table so the child could be prepared as best as possible in that transition stage. The goal is to help that child be as successful as he or she could be. And we have to plan it from, like I said, junior high school.
Yes, and junior high school is a critical time because we have seen that a lot of students, they know which career path they want to be on by elementary, and then it's really sparked in junior high. So, Jasmine, did you know there was a difference between the IUP diploma and a high school general education diploma?
I had some semblance. I taught elementary and middle school, so I specifically 5th grade, then 6th grade. So I will say, as far as teaching, my knowledge or information about the high school level or where students would end outside, depending on what type of diploma they got, that was limited.
Mm. Mhm. So I have a confession to make. did work in special education 20 something years ago, and I really didn't know in depth about the IEP diploma and the high school general education diploma until I really started getting into law and really started figuring out ah, what what's next for the student, a student who has been receiving special education services and now they graduate. What's next? So this conversation is very important because I want parents and the community to understand that there are different paths when it comes to special education, a student receiving special education services. However, the parent has a seat at the table during the IEP meeting. They are part of the IEP team, and their input is very valuable. Also, the student has a seat at the table. So, I want to say this before we even get too far into this conversation. Rebecca Russell, she is an advocate, but she is an author too. And Rebecca, tell us about your book.
Oh, my book. It's based on the USVI's IEP. What I did was I took each question of the IEP, I stated it, and then I interpret it in layman terms as best as I could to help those who need that added clarification. The next section of the book gives an answer, a sample answer to the question being asked. And the other section of the book has a space so you could now answer the question that was originally asked. What is the present level of performance for my student? And it does that through all the questions of the IEP. I did that because I didn't get that clarity and guidance when I was on St. Croix. And I wanted to give this back to help other families maneuver through the IEP process because it's not an easy process. I in the book also states well, it has sample IEPs for the 13 diagnoses on the IDA, so parents can see what a full IEP can look like, what accommodations can look like, what supports can look like, because a lot of our parents don't ask questions for many different reasons. So I'm trying to reach those parents who are not asking questions and try to help this pathway a little bit to be a little bit more smoother for them. And it also has a glossary, certain terms to know, not all the terms, but basic terms to know in the special education arena.
And when we talk about parents being advocates, and we talk about those questions that they don't want to ask, Rebecca, why do you think they don't want to ask questions?
One answer would be because you will have persons at the table that they're actually intimidated by because Mary Sam has PhD slash whatever, all these acronyms behind an name. So they don't want to sound stupid at the table. They don't want to ask a question and they look at it like, oh my God, she really asked that question. They don't want that feeling. They're already intimidated, confused, stressed, and overwhelmed. They don't want that feeling. So the next best thing is to just go along to get along. Yeah, that's what's been happening. Then you have the population
Wow.
who don't understand one bit of what's happening. Just shake your head and smile and sign. We can't have that. That shouldn't
So,
be.
Rebecca, what do you recommend? What do you recommend for parents to be better advocates? How can parents become better advocates?
Ask questions, get involved, and for those parents, caregivers who can't do it alone, seek assistance. Disability Rights
Mm.
Center is available on St. Thomas and St. Croix to help with these services. You don't have to do it alone. You don't, no one says you have to know everything about everything in this life. No. Special education is a world by itself. It's a whirlwind by
Yes.
itself with laws and statutes and rights. And some of us can't keep up with it. It's just overwhelming trying to pay the rent and do everything else you do on a regular basis. It's too much.
And from Jasmine, from teacher's perspective, what would you say as we wrap up for advice for the parents?
Please don't ever be afraid to fight for your child. If there's a question that you have, there's no question that is dumb. There's no question that is stupid. Ask whatever it is you have to ask. And if you don't feel comfortable asking your student's teacher, if you don't feel comfortable asking their administration, there are other resources available. Like Rebecca said, she wrote a book on this. You could reach out to our office about IEPs. Any questions you have, please don't ever think that it's not appropriate when it comes to fighting for your child.
And I would say, you know your child. As a parent, you know your child, you know your child's needs. And as a student with a disability, the student knows what they need and what they need to be comfortable just at school and getting that educational performance. So, Rebecca Russell, thank you very much for being on our show today. It's always a pleasure. And I just want to let you know that you are greatly appreciated. So, Ability Radio has been brought to you by the Disability Rights Center of the Virgin Islands. And like Rebecca said, we have 2 locations, one in St. Thomas and one in St. Croix next to the former Kmart. If you may have any questions, reach us at 340-776-4303. Once again, Rebecca Russell, have a great day. Jasmine, thank you for co-hosting.
Thank you for having me.
You have a great day.
The views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of WTJX, its board, staff, or underwriters.